Monday's Tale, Jenny Hobbs. Lindele had one dress, and her mother washed it in the river on Saturdays. For a few hours then she would sit inside the hut, wrapped in her sleeping blanket, while the dress dried, swaying in the reeds near the washing place. When she put it on again, the faded blue cotton stood stiffly away from her blanket-damp skin, smelling of sunlight soap and the vivid green vegetable warmth of the reeds. By Sunday, when she wore it to the mission church, the dress would have lost its crispness. On Monday morning, when she left before sunrise for school, it was back to its usual limp, threadbare state, clinging about her legs as she moved, too tight across the chest, discolored under the arms, and beginning to get grubby round the neck. This Monday morning she looked into the jagged mirrors stuck in the back of a thorn tree outside the hut and thought, the nuns will surely give me another dress this Christmas. The sky was a cloudless, paling grey overhead, smudged with the smoke that hung in lazy coils above the cooking fire where her mother was squatting. The porridge is ready. Her mother's voice was hoarse from last night's singing. Lindele turned abruptly away from the mirror and crossed the trodden earth between the huts with now hurrying bare feet. I'm late. I'll take some in my mug and eat it along the way. She untied a white enamel mug from the loose ends of the cord that held her small bundle of books together. With a wooden spoon from her mother's hand, she scooped a sticky mass of mealie meal porridge out of the black iron pot and scraped it off into the mug. Take more, you will be hungry later. It's enough, Mama. We get brown bread and peanut butter from the nuns at midday, and milk too. Take more, you are still growing. But the hoarse voice was indifferent. Her mother began to rock backwards and forwards on her heels, crooning 3 monotonous notes over and over. The hem of her dark print skirt was damp and heavy with dust. Clearly she had drunk too much beer again last night. Lindele gave a click of disgust, and picking up the bundle of books, made her way down a rocky path to the road. This was broad and gravelled, and ran beside the muddy reed-choked river to the nearest town, 40 miles away. It served the cane and timber farms further north. There was little traffic beyond an occasional farmer's pickup and the heavy steep-sided cane trucks that roared past every half hour during the cutting season, billowing dust. The road was badly rutted, and when the rains came, its surface ulcerated into deep potholes where the water collected, and ridged truck tires gouged away the soft mud. Lindele broke into a jog when she left the path. It was 6 miles to the mission school, and if she didn't hurry, she'd arrive too late for a place on one of the benches. She liked to sit on a bench. Sitting on the floor meant that her dress got so dirty that by Thursday she would be ashamed of wearing it. The nuns were kind. They ignored raggedness and superficial dirt as long as you washed your body regularly. But Lindele could not bear standing close to their immaculate white linen robes when her own skimpy blue was soiled. She jogged with the books tucked under her arm and the mug in her hand, pinching up mouthfuls of warm porridge and rolling them neatly with her fingers before she put them in her mouth. When the porridge was finished, she stopped and wiped the mug out carefully with a handful of dry grass, then tied it back next to the books and began to run again. The sun was just rising as she reached the sharp corner where the road swung suddenly to avoid a bend in the river. Its steep embankment had eroded during last summer's heavy rains into a fan of jagged ridges that plunged down into a thicket of dense bush. Slowing, she heard the water trickling under the trees and thought, licking the last yellowish crumb of porridge off her fingers, I must have a sip, just a mouthful. It won't take long. As soon as she came to the edge of the embankment, she saw the car. It lay nose down in the bush, its bright yellow boot tilting upwards with a chrome fender glittering weakly in the first rays of the sun. A broken stinkweed bush leaned at an angle over the rear window. Its thick furry leaves were already drooping. The car was absolutely still and silent. Lindele was shocked. A car tossed down there like an old bottle? In her experience, cars were swift and powerful. They did not, could not, plunge off the road and die. She had never been inside one, though several times she had crept up close and dared to stroke the smooth, hot, shiny skin of the cars that crouched ticking in the sunshine outside the trading store. Seeing its stillness, She was afraid, but as she turned to run away, the car groaned. She stopped at once. The sound was unmistakable. The car was in pain. Lindele hated any form of suffering. She had been forced to watch once when her father sacrificed a goat the time her grandfather was ill. The sight of the animal's wild, hoof-flashing struggles, a spurt of warm blood over her father's hand as he cut its throat, the weak spasms as it lay dying with glazing eyes made her stomach sick. She would not eat her portion of the stringy meat afterwards, though they had all laughed at her. The car groaned again. Without further hesitation, she dropped her books, mug clattering, and slid down the bank to where it lay. In her haste, she fell against a ridge of hard-packed earth as rough as a cheese grater, scraping long grazes on both shins. She pushed herself away impatiently and slipped with more caution down the last few feet, not wanting to stumble against the car and perhaps hurt it some more. She could not have said what she expected to see. The goat's agonized bleating and the howls of her fat-bellied little brothers when they fell, and the car's groans all had the same effect on her, an impulse to hold and soothe the sufferer until the pain went away. Her first thought when she saw the white man crumpled over his steering wheel was, "There must be some mistake." She stood, puzzled and staring. Through the shattered window she saw his broad, cream-shirted shoulders jerk backwards as he tried to move. Another long groan bubbled from his mouth. The side of his face was masked in blood that had already congealed in places. His fair curly hair was matted with it. The only eye she could see was swollen almost closed. The wrinkled skin on the back of his neck was deeply tanned down to the collar line, where it gave way to a sudden vivid whiteness that fascinated her. For a long time she stood watching him, tense and motionless as a buck that has just lifted his head from grazing. Apart from the nuns, she had no knowledge of white people. They were different from herself, that was clear. She had wondered often if they had the same feelings, hunger, shame, happiness, as she did. Would they sometimes cry at night into their blankets? Did their bellies also rumble when their mealie sacks grew empty towards the end of the month? With curious dread, she took a step closer. A small stick cracked under her foot. The white man's eye opened in its fissure of swollen flesh and swung towards her. It was a clear, brilliant blue, like a chip of summer sky. She froze. His shoulders heaved, lifting his head a few inches off the steering wheel. The words came in a gurgle. "Please, help." The blue eye bored at her, fiercely alive, demanding, desperate, until the bloody head slumped forward again and disappeared like a snuffed candle. When he had not moved for several minutes, Lindele crept closer and put her hand on the scratched yellow door, leaning in through its fringe of crazed glass so that she could look at the rest of him. He seemed very big, a hunched giant with a grotesquely bent brown-booted leg. Drops of blood had spattered and dried on his khaki twill riding breeches, but the paisley scarf at his neck was sodden, and she saw that there was an ugly seeping wound under his jaw. A white pith helmet like the father's wore at the mission lay on its side on the floor, covered in dusty finger marks. He was breathing in long, shuddering gasps, and to her surprise, she caught the smell of liquor on his breath. She knew it well. Her mother smelled like that often in the mornings. It had not occurred to Lindele that white men might also drink the thick, sour beer that stood perpetually fermenting in covered petrol drums under the thorn trees. Did they scream and sob when they drank too much, as her mother did, pounding at her slack breasts in an ecstasy of jealousy over her father's new young wife? The head on the steering wheel rolled suddenly sideways, and the eye blazed out at her again. It was so close that she could see into its hot blue depths, and could have touched the fine network of red veins scribbled on its pale, puffed lid. "Go! Help!" he snarled. Pinkish froth appeared at the corners of his mouth. When she didn't move, it jerked open in a rictus of pain, and he screamed, "Go!" She jumped back as though bitten, and went scrambling up the bank on all fours. A paroxysm of exhausted coughing followed her. In spite of her terror, she knew now what she must do. At the top, panting, she snatched up the books and ran as fast as she could back along the road towards her home. The enamel mug banged against her knuckles. The bright low sun burned in her eyes. Soon she was sweating in little runnels that ran down her neck and arms and soaked into the thin fabric of her dress. She didn't feel the sharp-edged stones cutting her feet. Fear of the blue eye lashed at her heels like a whip. When she reached the bottom of the path, she started to call, "Mama! Mama!" Outside the huts, the fire lay smouldering under a heap of grey embers. No one came out. "Mama!" she cried. There was a distant squabble of children playing down at the river, but no one answered her call. When she stooped through the doorway of her mother's hut, she found her sprawled on the rumpled pile of blankets that should already have been hung out to air, snoring through a slack mouth. "Mama!" She shook the bony shoulder, bared where the loose top of her torn blouse had slipped away. "Mama, there's a white man in a car!" Her mother grunted and rolled away. "Mama!" Desperately she grabbed at the small brass ring in her mother's exposed ear and tugged it hard. The sleeping woman gave a hoarse yelp and sat up, muzzy and furious, rubbing her earlobe. "What are you doing?" "There's a white man in a car, blood on his face." Her mother seemed not to hear. "Why aren't you in school, huh? Why do you come back to plague me?" She swung her head from side to side like the bad-tempered, humped bull with long horns that her father kept in a stone enclosure behind his hut. "Mama, this white man—" "Stop blabbering at me. Go away. You must go to school so that you can learn to read and write. You must be an educated girl." Mumbling aggrievedly, she settled down among the blankets and began to snore again. There had been a time when her mother would hold her school books gingerly in water-wrinkled hands and say, "You can read these, all of them." Lindele could still remember the feel of her mother's breath on her neck the afternoon she stammered through her first reader. It was before the new wife came and the brewing of beer began. She looked down now at the dishevelled heap of old clothes and shrugged the memory away. There was no one else here that she could tell. Her father was seldom home. Outside the stale-smelling hut, the sun's growing heat shimmered off the smoothly trodden earth. When she reached the road, she broke into a jog again. She was hopelessly late for school, but the nuns would listen when she told them about the white man and the broken yellow car. Perhaps they would even give her a special seat on one of the benches, seeing she carried such important news. At the bend where the car lay hidden, she crossed over the road to the other side and put her hand and the bundle of books over her ears so that she wouldn't hear the injured man's noises. The thought of the angry blue eye lying in wait down there gave her feet extra speed. She ran steadily past the small group of buildings lying a little further on, past the trading store and the butchery and the railway siding, where the cane trucks would soon be disgorging their first loads. Half an hour later she reached the whitewashed school building, and at last she was able to blurt her story to Sister Margaret, the fat one with the shiny red nose. The rest of the class listened, impressed, hardly shuffling their feet. "A motor accident," Sister Margaret said in agitation. "But why, Lindele, didn't you go straight to the trading store and tell them? It's so much closer." "I first thought to go to my mother, but she was sick," Lindele explained. "And then I thought to come to you, Sis Margaret. You will surely help this white man with the blood on his face." Trust shone from her dark, concerned eyes. There were oozing grazes on her dusty legs and damp half-moons of sweat under the arms of the dress that had been new last Christmas and was now fit for nothing but dish rags. The nun sighed. Patting Lindele briskly on the arm, she hurried out to telephone the owner of the store and the police. When they finally reached the yellow car, the driver was dead.